So I come from a family that's an inverted pyramid, meaning that every generation we're just getting smaller and smaller. Uh, as a consequence, when I was growing up, I didn't have very many cousins around. And what few cousins I did have actually lived way up north in Chicago. I was growing up in St. Louis. I did have one cousin who lived nearby. His name was Craig. And I would see Craig, he was still like an hour away. I would see him a few times a year, Christmas, Thanksgiving, the odd summer barbecue, but not much more than that. And the truth was, we didn't really like each other. I don't want to give you the wrong impression. We didn't dislike each other, but we weren't close because we just didn't have very much in common. He was 3 years older than I was, so he was older. He was smarter. He was into sports. He was straighter. We just didn't have a lot going on that we could, talk about. The one thing we ended up having in common, though, was that eventually we both became lawyers. And he, of course, did it first because he was older. He went to law school. He graduated. He married a lovely woman. I was in their wedding, I think, at the behest of his mother. And he got a really good job at a really good firm, and he became a junior partner. And they bought a lovely home in St. Louis. And his life was on this very good trajectory. I, on the other hand, had moved to New York City, and I graduated from law school 1 month before the New York Times article came out that discussed the fact that there was a new disease that was affecting gay men in the United States. And that was in July of 1981. And of course, that was AIDS and the beginning of AIDS. So I became involved right away in providing legal services for people with AIDS, working at the Gay Men's Health Crisis in New York, doing deathbed wills, fighting insurance companies, and I brought some of the early discrimination cases. And that was my career in the 1980s. That was my path. Craig, on the other hand, something happened on his pathway. Something bad happened. And he and his wife ended up being divorced. He stopped working. He became reclusive and obese. And we didn't see anything of Craig for a long time. Then one day in May, the year before last, my sister called to say that Craig had been found dead in his home. And she didn't know what to do, but under the circumstances, she had to have him cremated. It was fortuitous because not long after that, she ran into a friend of his who explained that they had just been talking about this a few weeks before, and that not only did he want to be cremated, but he had the express wish of wanting to have his ashes scattered at Manassas Battlefield, the Civil War thing. So by this time, I'm actually living in Washington, D.C. And my sister says this, ashes at Manassas. And I think, it sounds like a Cole Porter song, right? And I can do that. And so she sent me the ashes. And one day I'm coming home and I pull back into the driveway, and there's Craig sitting on the front porch in a box. And I hauled him in and I began my investigation about whether or not you can in fact do this. You will be interested to know you can in fact have your ashes scattered at Manassas. The thing is, you need to have a permit. And nowhere does it tell you how to get that permit. It took me a very long time to figure it out. And so the ashes arrived in June. I had until August because that was when his 65th birthday was going to be. And I like that sort of symmetry, and I wanted to scatter him on his birthday. Over the summer, I was assiduous in finding out how to get this permit. I finally got the application, which it's a general use application, which is what threw me off, and I filled it out. And it asks questions like, what's the purpose of your event? Spreading some ashes. How many cars will be at your event? 1. Will you be distributing literature at your event? No. How many people will be at your event? 1. two-ish, you know. So I fill it out, I send it off, and I don't hear anything. Finally, 1 week before Craig's 65th birthday, I get an email saying that the application for the permit had been granted. And I downloaded it, and I had my permit. Come the day, I took the day off, and I packed Craig up, packed his ashes up in one bag. They were heavy. And in another bag, I packed 2 liters of water so that I could wash the container out afterwards, so none of him would be left here. And some gloves, because I have a little allergy to dust, and I didn't want to get dust on me. And then I downloaded a prayer book that had been given to Union soldiers in Massachusetts as they went off to war. And I took that, and I drove out to the Manassas Battlefield. It's a 45-minute drive. I'd never been there. It's a vast place. And all of those crisscross fences around. And I was supposed to go to a place called Stone Bridge, but I didn't know where Stone Bridge was. So I drove to the visitor center, which is in the middle of this great big empty field. It was a Tuesday, and there were no cars there. It was just me. And there's this low building, brick building. And I got out of the car and I walked up, and I was struck by how beautiful of a day it was. There was a big blue sky with the big white puffy clouds, and the only thing was it was hot, and it was very humid. You know, it was summer in Virginia. And I get up to the door of the visitor center, and I open it, and there's that welcome rush of air conditioning. And inside there's this long wooden bar. And at one end of the bar, there's this kind of older man, this aged docent fellow, right? And he's standing there. And then behind the bar, there's this big map of the battlefield. And at the other end of the bar, there's this woman ranger. And she's leaning against the wall like she's holding it up. And she's got her straw hat pulled down. And she's got her head down. She's, you know, kind of taking a snooze. And she had this long red hair. And she was tall and lanky. And I'm telling you, if Clint Eastwood and Frances McDormand would have a daughter, this would be her. And so I walk in, and the aged docent fellow says, "Welcome to Manassas. Where are you from?" And I'm like, "Well, no. You don't have to do that. I'm not a tourist. I'm just here from Arlington. I've just come here to spread someone's ashes." And what he seems to hear is, "I've just come here to bother little children." "What?" he says. And I'm like, no. It's okay. I have a permit. And I pull it out of my bag. And what he seems to hear is, "I have a flying saucer outside." And he's like, "What?" And I look down the bar, and she has raised her hat, and she's looking at me, and our eyes are meeting, and we are communicating. He and I, we are not communicating. And she pushes herself off the wall, and she strolls down to the middle of the map, and she points up, and she goes, "Stone Bridge," and points. "Go down to the driveway, make a right, go a mile, make a left, Stone Bridge." And then she walks back to her spot, puts her leg up against the wall again, pulls her hat down, and goes back to snoozing. He's looking at me, and I say, "Thank you very much." And I pick up my bags, and he says, "Don't you want to see the film narrated by Richard Dreyfuss?" And I said, no. I've got a time slot of 11 to 11:15. I got to go spread these ashes. And he says, "Whatever floats your boat." And I make a beeline for the car, and I get in, and I follow her directions. I find the parking lot, and there I am at Stone Bridge. I get out of the car, and boy, is it a hot day. I'm telling you. And I wore long sleeves and jeans, and I had a hat because I was sure I was going to get a tick out there, you know. And I didn't want a tick. And so I walked over to Stone Bridge, and it's this beautiful brick archway bridge that goes across the Aquagran River. And as you approach the bridge, there were 2 panels explaining about the battles of Manassas. Now, it turns out there were 2 battles at Manassas, one in 1861 and one in 1862. The one in 1861 was in July, the one in 1862 was in August. So I'm thinking, wow, here I am in the first week of August, right sort of sandwiched in between when these two battles took place in the summertime like this. And I got to the edge of the water and the bridge, and I stopped to think about this, and I could picture, you know, what that must have been like on a hot day like this, where there were horses and wool uniforms and blood and screaming and fear and bombs and noise and how horrible it all must have been, and the fear that those people must have felt. And I knew something of that fear because my days back working in AIDS at Gay Men's Health Crisis, uh, you were afraid. I mean, fear sat on my shoulder here every time I walked into one of those hospital rooms. It was there talking to me. And you never knew if you were the next one who was going to get it. And that had to be something of what they were feeling. And it brought a lot back. Anyway, I'd come to the bridge, so it was time to cross it. And I picked up my bags, I walked across that bridge, and my instructions were that when I got to the other side, there would be a pathway to the right. And to take that dirt pathway and walk along the river about 40 or 50 yards, and then look up into the woods and find a spot and do it. So I walked about 50 yards. I couldn't find a spot I liked. And then I got a little further, and I saw this great big tree up there. It was really tall. And I looked up at that, and I said, that will be his headstone. And so I turned, and I traipsed up into the woods. And there are a million spider webs, man. They are all over my face. They're all over my arms. It's creeping me out. I get through all of it. I get to the clearing in the woods. I'm sweating like you wouldn't believe. And I just want to get this over with. And I look around. I'm feeling self-conscious. There's nobody. The river is flowing by. It's very pleasant. And I get out my pocket knife, which thank God I could remember the pocket knife because I would never have gotten those ashes open without it. And they were in those heavy plastic bags with those twist ties like they tie your wrists with. And so I undid it all, and it was very unceremonious. I just scattered the ashes around the tree. And then I took the water and I washed out the bags, and I put it on top. And that was it. He was there, and I was done essentially. But it felt like not enough. So he was not religious, but our grandmother was. So I said a few prayers from our faith. I opened up the prayer book from the Civil War. I read the 23rd Psalm, which was handy because the river was right there. And then I read a prayer of absolution from the book. And I felt really, really self-conscious. I mean, one, I'm standing there in long sleeves, I'm wet, I'm in my hat and in my silly gloves. And I'm thinking, if anybody walks by, I'm here talking to myself, what are they gonna think? And then secondly, I'm giving somebody absolution, which who am I to give anybody absolution? You know, what am I doing here? And also I felt bad because it's just the two of us here in the woods. And this is the end of his life. This is where it stops. And so I felt bad, and I wanted out. And so I finally looked down at him and I said, look, I hope this was good for you, pal, but I got to get out of here. And I grabbed the bags and I scooted on out, and I got back to the car and I flipped it on and I pushed on the air conditioner on max, and I just sat there and I thought, it's noon. What am I going to do now? And I thought, you know, you're moving away soon to upstate New York. You never been to Middleburg. Let's go to Middleburg. So I put in the GPS, I drive to Middleburg, and I gotta say, it's a lovely little town. I pulled into town, cobblestones, lots of old buildings, very pretty little main street. And I see off to my left this bank that has now been made into an oyster bar. And it's like a mirage in the desert, this thing. And so I stop the car and I get out and I make a beeline to this place, and I order my dozen oysters and a Prosecco, and I'm sitting there. and I eat them, and I'm feeling better and better with each passing minute. And before long, I'm feeling really good. And it's not just the Prosecco. And I leave the place, and it's clouding up a bit outside, and it's clouding up a lot, and it's really humid. And I start walking down the street, and I am struck by how good I feel. And this little voice inside my head, that little voice that is not often very nice, that little voice that can really be grating at times, that voice says to me, you know what? You did right by that man today. You did good. And I gotta tell you, the weight of the world fell off my shoulders. I mean, I felt lighter than air. I felt so really relieved and good. I felt liberated. Ah, it was a wonderful feeling, not a feeling that comes along very often. And that voice, that pat on the back meant the world to me. And then the sky did what the sky does in Virginia in the afternoon in the summer. It just opened up and let loose, and water comes down in sheets, and I am now wet again, and it's just sheets going across the street. And I think of him laying out there in the woods where I left him, and that powder being beaten into that hollowed ground. And I could only hope that being there brought him at least a semblance of the peace for him, as it did for me to lay him down there. Thank you.